joined now live at the Boston Public Library by one of our most admired guests.
That's right.
And people in general. That'd be Margaret Marshall, former Chief Justice of the state's Supreme Judicial Court. As you all know, a little bit more than 20 years ago, she made same-sex marriage a reality in Massachusetts through a decision she wrote. She joins us now to discuss the state of the judiciary in this country, the future of the judiciary, and the country itself. And by the way, she will receive, I shouldn't say by the way, she will receive the highest honor bestowed by the National Judicial College, the Sandra Day O'Connor Award, tomorrow night. Justice Marshall, congratulations, and it's great to see you.
It's great
Thank
to be
you.
back. Thank you.
so much for joining us, Justice Marshall. So I'll start with the question of the week. What was your reaction to the election?
Been there before, we'll do it again.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, I love Shirley Leung. I'm a huge admirer of her. How could you not see this coming?
Did you see it coming?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you I can see it coming because I wrote to friends in South Africa and said he will be elected.
And why?
Yeah.
Because ordinary Americans are hurting badly, number one, and all over the world we have globalization of labor markets, and every country is having a hard time dealing with immigration, every single country. And I think we haven't understood the impact of social media. I mean, we just haven't.
You know, when you said every country is dealing with immigration, I mentioned this before, that this is not, we can seal the southern border, we can deport people if that's what we're going to do, but it's not going to solve the problem, because people are going to flee desperation forever. I mean, it's happened for centuries.
I understand. But
Yeah.
you can go back to the Brexit vote in England. And that was fundamentally, what the European Union did was open the borders. And so what you saw is English plumbers and carpenters and chimney sweeps saying, all of these people are coming in and undercutting our wages. It doesn't matter what the actual on-the-ground reality is. It's that feeling.
I totally agree.
I saw a graph in the Wall Street Journal. It must have been about 1999, 2000, 2001, which showed the percentage of people immigrating to the United States as compared to the then population of the United States. And what it showed was we had a massive reform of immigration law in 1990. And up until that time, as the population of the United States grew, so grew the percentage of immigrants, a pretty steady pace. And then all of a sudden, in 1990, there was a sharp increase. And that, if you look at what's happened over the last 4 years, the Biden administration in particular, that increase has just gone through the ceiling. Now, you can be sitting in South Dakota or in western Massachusetts and you say, we need people to work. But the perception is that it's not my country anymore. So I came as an immigrant in 1968. I became a citizen in 1977. This country has given me everything. I mean, this is the country that I love. I'm going to love it until the day I die. And when friends of mine saying, we're thinking of moving to Spain, it's like, in what planet are you living? I mean, literally, what planet? This is a great country.
But those people, I think I can speak for them, share a feeling of dread about the future, despite this country's history. You don't share that feeling, Justice Marshall?
Jim, I'm not naive, but in 1966, when I welcomed Robert Kennedy in South Africa, those were the darkest, you wouldn't have a show like this. I mean, everybody had been banned, everybody had been outlawed, the press freedoms had been decimated, and you just put one foot in front of the other and did what you needed to do. There was no light. Here there's so many shining lights.
That speech changed your life, didn't it?
It certainly did.
We have a little sound from that. This is Robert F. Kennedy, Day of Affirmation speech at the University of Cape Town in 1966. Just a touch.
We must recognize the full human equality of all of our people before God, before the law, and in the councils of government. We must do this not because it is economically advantageous, although it is, not because the laws of God command it, although they do, we must do it for the single and fundamental reason that it is the right thing to do.
Oh, God. What did it feel? Do you remember the physical feeling of that moment listening to Kennedy in Cape Town?
I certainly do. I mean, it feels like yesterday, and it was, what,
58 years ago.
58, almost 60 years ago. What I try to convey to people and why I'm hopeful about this country, I mean, think of what this country has done. I mean, every time we think we are going to lose it, what's the it? It's the magical form of democracy that we started off in the late 18th century. And for 237 years now, I mean, we are the longest lived democracy the world has ever seen. And I'm not walking away from that. And I don't care. Elon Musk is a South African.
I'm well aware of that.
I know. Did you know little Elon back at home?
I don't know. He and I seem to have taken different paths. Maybe I should have taken his path. But, I mean, of course it's a challenge, but it doesn't terrify me. I mean, who are the people who've, Nelson Mandela. You have to find a path.
Find me a Nelson Mandela and I'll be a little bit more hopeful. Let me tell you the thing I'm most nervous about is the Supreme Court. They stood up to Trump during his presidency on some things, on other things they didn't, and then not too long ago they issued a decision that I would say has got to be in the top 10 worst decisions in my estimation. I'm nervous saying this in front of you. This immunity decision to me was a total capitulation to the Trump presidency. I'd like to hear your thoughts both on the decision and whether you, unlike the majority of the American people, have confidence that this court will actually uphold the Constitution.
We're in an era where, for some reason, not just in our country, but in many countries, we seem to be drawn to strong executives. I mean, here, Italy, Hungary, Turkey, just about every place
Sure.
you can think of. And so I think first and foremost, what concerns me is this kind of need for authoritarianism, or this need for a powerful executive presence. I am informed, I have no way of knowing, that Chief Justice Roberts didn't understand that his opinion would be viewed as a pro-Trump opinion. Now, what that says to me is that the Chief Justice is surrounded by people and is not out there. But I might also say that might be for those of us who didn't see this coming either. Jim, I'm going to answer your question, but I'll just tell you one thing. I don't sign an online petition. I mean, I care passionately about an independent judiciary. I worked hard for it when I was the Chief Justice. And what do? I come and talk on, shows, wonderful shows like yours. I go into schools. I accept awards and give speeches. You have to work at it. There's a wonderful saying of Sandra Day O'Connor, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who's a huge hero of mine, who said, understanding the Constitution is not passed through the gene pool. You have to learn it over and over and over again. And I think if you ask Americans, do you want to have the feeling that when you go into court, you will only get justice if you are either rich or powerful? I mean, most Americans would say no. In Massachusetts, we don't have elected judges. I work very hard to make sure we don't have elected judges. But while I was Chief Justice, I had to strengthen judicial accountability. We had to increase judicial education. We had to have reviews because people want to know that their government is working.
We have a Supreme Court with virtually no judicial accountability. I think we'd agree when it comes to the Clarence Thomases of the world, to some degree the Justice Alitos of the world, which is one of the reasons that only 37% trust them to do the right thing.
And I would say, if I were an American age 21, I would start working to amend our Constitution so there were time limits.
Term limits on them.
Whatever it is. the citizens of Massachusetts in 1972 all got together and said you can be on the Supreme Judicial Court for life, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, for life, subject to mandatory retirement at age 70. Every single county, every single district voted in favor of that. Don't tell me that you can't change the Constitution. You have to change the Constitution.
You don't have to change the Constitution to expand the court. Do you support that?
Yes.
You do. And how do you respond to the argument that goes, Democrats, if they're ever in control again, they'll expand. Republicans in control, they'll expand, and it just never ends.
Well, we'll have 40 judges, and then sooner or later somebody will have to deal with everybody, and they'll strike a deal.
We're talking to former Chief Justice of the SJC, Margaret Marshall.
You know, I don't have your perspective, obviously, because I didn't come here from South Africa and see what went on down there in the days of apartheid. But as an American who did grow up here thinking that, you know, the United States is one of these countries that we'd sooner or later always do the right thing, I've lost that sense now. You don't think I should have? Okay.
No, you just take, you know, look, I love everybody who's born in America, but you take it for granted.
We do.
That your freedom will go on forever. You have to work for it. You have to work for it. You have to be, you know, you have to teach civics in the schools. And if the government isn't paying for civics teachers, go and volunteer in the schools.
But, you know, I think we've been let down by so many places, the judiciary being one of them, because I think that you do get the sense, I don't know if you were saying, I wasn't sure what you were saying, but to me, we do have the sense now that the courts work for you if you're rich and powerful. If you're not rich and powerful, even though they do sometimes, that they don't. We've seen this with Trump defy all these court cases and get away with them. And now, instead of having a government of laws, we have this, and the president, no one is above the law. Apparently the president is above the law now because of this immunity decision. That's how it feels to me.
I understand that, and there have been times when it feels as if the courts are way out of whack. I mean, there have been so many decisions over the decades. The courts are not the places to protect democracy. They really aren't. The people protect democracy. The legislature, the juries, the voters. When you have people attempting to take away the vote, you have to fight like crazy. I mean, I had the great privilege of meeting and talking to John Lewis, you know, the great civil rights leader. He went into Congress. He had to work across the aisle. He worked across the aisle. He didn't give up because they'd practically beaten him to death.
Yeah, fractured his skull.
I mean,
the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
The question for me is it worth fighting for? You know, I want to go back. The United States, it gave me everything. I thought law was a vehicle of oppression. I really didn't know what I was doing in the world. I came to the United States, and it is the story of immigrant after immigrant after immigrant. You come here and you discover how free this country is, how wonderful it is, how open it is. Now, they've been terrible demagogues. I mean, I'm not whitewashing American history. Think of the civil rights movement. But, states, there are thousands of judges in the United States. Yeah, there are 9 people, you know, sit in Washington. But there are thousands of judges who every day are trying to do the best they can. But if you don't tell them what you want them to do, and if you don't have good lawyers, I mean, sooner or later, people will change. Let me go back to expanding the court, Jim, because I'm sort of...
Of course.
So Franklin Roosevelt threatened to expand the court, threatened to extend it. And this is what he said, that was one of his great failures. I don't think it was a failure.
He got what he wanted.
He got what he wanted. And I think when President...
Explain, not an expansion of the court, but legislation that he wanted.
Well, he got the legislation, but much more important, he got the 9 justices on the court who had refused to, who kept overruling the New Deal legislation. Right. They changed. A switch in time changed 9, right? It's not quite that. I don't know why President Biden, out of the box, said, I don't want to expand the court. Why? Well, because I know the answers. Well, then when they get in, you know, they'll expand it. I don't know what would have happened to the court if the court thought it suddenly was going to get 4, 5, or 6 new justices.
It's a wonderful point. So can we just switch this for a minute? Not me expressing worry about the Supreme Court not doing the right thing, which I think more often than not it is not. They do the right thing, and to quote President Andrew Jackson, and no one knows if this quote is real, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Donald Trump says, thank you very much, I'm going to keep doing whatever it is I did that you consider to be unconstitutional. I'm guessing your response is the only way to deal with that is for people to do what you said they have to do, which is stand up and be heard. That's the only protection we have.
Yes, but you also have, for example, we had, with Brown against Board of Education, which was only 50-something years ago, no, 70 years ago, I'm getting old, 70 years ago, we had to send federal troops in to get that court order enforced. Do I worry that you might get another court order and you would have to send troops in and the president wouldn't send troops in? Of course I worry about that, but we are just at the beginning. Donald Trump, President-elect Donald Trump, he says one thing and then he says another thing. There are lots of opportunities. There are lots of opportunities for both parties to work together. Nancy Pelosi would say the Democratic Party is the party of working people. There's been a huge increase of unionization in this country. Are you telling me that they can never make a deal? Elizabeth Warren and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance working on banking regulation.
They did. We talked to her about that, yeah.
You have to do it. It's hard. It's not easy. It's not a song in the park.
You're a little too hopeful for me, Justice Marshall, I have to tell you. So I know you hate these kind of questions because I asked them in the past. I once asked Justice Marshall on the show, so when you go to a cocktail party with Supreme Court justices, do you ever say to them, so what are you going to rule? And the look on this woman's face when I asked that, so I'm almost embarrassed to ask this, but I'm going to do it anyway. There's talk about whether or not, in Democratic circles, about whether or not Justice Sotomayor, who is 70, has some health issues, even though her staff says she's fine, should step down now so we don't have another situation where a great justice like Ruth Bader Ginsburg sticks around, dies under Trump, and we get Amy Coney Barrett as opposed to what we might have had had she resigned earlier. Should Sotomayor step down from the bench?
I've got two answers to that. No, because we're not going to get a new justice in before...
Coney Barrett was in a month.
For some reasons, we didn't manage to get somebody in through with...
non-Justice Merrick Garland.
Yeah,
okay, go ahead.
And the second thing is I want to say that my respect for Justice Stephen Breyer, who I think gets far too little credit for what he did. One reason by stepping down when he's, he's physically fine, he's mentally on top of the game. If there are two things that have saddened me about this country, it is that my generation, I'm 80, and the people above me have held on and held on and held on and not stepped aside. I've seen it in academia. There used to be mandatory retirement at age 70. It has nothing to do with mental competency. It has to do with moving over for new generations. I was a great admirer of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I cannot hold the Republican Party responsible for what happened to the court. She should not have remained when she was so desperately ill. I admire Justice Breyer. I have a lot of regard for President Biden. I do not understand why he stayed for as long as he did. I think that Vice President Kamala Harris, 100 days, we've never elected a woman. You have to make...
we never had a woman Chief Justice till somebody. Do you know who that was? You do, okay. Okay.
But I'm saying, it's a kind of hubris. It's a selfishness. President, in your 40s, in your 50s, but why do we keep holding on? Because we're living longer and longer. And my very strong view is move aside. I hope I'm still intelligent and I hope I can still put sentences together. When I left the court, well, let me just back up. Chief Justice Wilkins was a great Chief Justice. He hit mandatory retirement at age 70, great Chief Justice of Massachusetts. He turned 70. Governor Cellucci appointed me. I turned 70. I was the first woman. He appointed Chief Justice Gantz, the first Chief Justice Ireland, the first African American. Then Chief Justice Gantz, the first Jewish Chief Justice. Then the great Chief Justice at the moment, Kimberly Budd. But that's what happens when you move aside and let new ideas.
So I want to be clear. I'm sorry. Just I want to be clear. If Chuck Schumer said, "I have the votes to hold hearings and confirm a nominee, President Biden, if you appoint him or her today before January 20th, would you urge Sotomayor to step down?"
Yes.
Okay.
You know,
If that was guaranteed.
I understand.
And not other. I mean, she's wonderful, and I just saw it, 2 weeks ago. It has nothing to do
Understood.
with mental competency.
Understood.
Chief Justice Marshall, you said at the beginning of this conversation that Americans are hurting and that immigration is going on all over the world and that we had a huge explosion of people coming across the border, which we did. So are you saying that you can understand because of that why Trump won, because Democrats were not taking the immigration issue or the economic issue as seriously as they should have?
I think they weren't articulating a vision. For example, when you ask Vice President Harris, Joe Biden clearly opened the borders. Now, one answer would be to say, look, there were children in cages. We had to change the policy. Why President Biden said, we welcome everybody who wants to come to the United States. It overwhelmed the system. People who were waiting to come legally just felt that, why not go illegal if you want to walk across the border? Of course we're a magnet. By the way, I would say the same thing in South Africa. South Africa is at the tip of Africa. It's one of the most successful economies. They are having a very difficult time keeping their borders closed, and as a consequence of which, people who fought hard to end apartheid, they are being undermined by people coming from... I've got nothing against Kenyans or Nigerians or Zambians. To the extent that we still have nation states can and should protect their borders. And if you happen to be a fabulous economy, as the United States is, not for consumers, but globally, our economy is terrific, of course people are going to want to come here. But does that mean to say that we can't control our borders? Of course not. Now, you can point fingers and say there was legislation that had been agreed to by the Republican Party and the Democratic Party until Donald Trump, apparently, President-elect Donald Trump said, kill the legislation. Well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But can we go back again and try to negotiate? That's what I mean. There's plenty.
Kamala Harris said she'd file that legislation again on day one had she been elected, for whatever it's worth.
And it may be that he's going to file it on day
see.
2.
Can we talk about a happy thing for 1 second, and then
I
we'll get
thought I
back to
was.
one. Well, no, you've been really upbeat, which means you'll never be on the show again because we don't do upbeat here. So, Sandra Day O'Connor, I think I read that it was 191 years, give or take a few, before the first woman justice, associate justice, was nominated to the Supreme Court. How many years before the first woman chief justice of the SJC? A couple hundred?
306.
You knew O'Connor, did you not?
Yeah, I did.
Can you tell us? I mean, you're getting this award tomorrow night, which is huge, needless to say, and to say it's well-deserved is almost ridiculous because it's so obvious. Tell us a little bit about not only her as a person, but that kind of person and how she saw her role on a court.
The most important thing to know about Justice O'Connor, I think, is apart from her childhood growing up on a farm, she was a state legislator and she was a state intermediate appellate judge, but especially a state legislator. We don't have anybody on our United States Supreme Court who has ever run for election.
That is amazing.
Now that is the first, when Justice David Souter stepped down, Justice Souter ran for election in New Hampshire. He was Attorney General, and then he served on the New Hampshire Supreme Court. That was the first time in our history that we had nobody who had either run for election,
Nor did I.
run for election, or served in state government. Chief Justice Earl Warren had been the governor
of
of California. In other words, it's not Republican or Democratic. It seems to me that one way to look at the United States Supreme Court is that it is very out of touch with the mass of this wonderful, bubbling, vibrant country in which we live. You have to go to Harvard or Yale law schools. Only now you can go to Notre Dame. You go from those...
Coney Barrett, for those who don't know.
You go from there and you go and work for a federal judge, usually an appellate judge, then you go and clerk on the United States Supreme Court, then you go and work in the Justice Department, Federal Justice Department, or for the Solicitor General, then maybe you go and teach at Harvard or Yale, and then you become a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
And
So you're suggesting, I guess, that one of the reasons she was as successful a force on the court was because of the experience that she brought there.
Absolutely. She was down to earth. I mean, I'm not saying these people are elitists.
I understand,
hate that
I understand.
But their life experience had been so different.
One last question from me, get back to the negative side of the tracks where I am most comfortable. Justice Marshall, Judge Merchant in New York, who I consider a pretty courageous guy when not only you being threatened, but your daughter is being threatened because of her political views, even though she has nothing to do with the case, has a pretty tough decision. Is why I think I speak for Marjorie. The notion that Donald Trump would escape all criminal liability, particularly post-conviction, is appalling. But I have to say, there's a piece of me that when I hear others say the people knew about these convictions and they decided they wanted him in the Oval Office rather than in a cell or as a convicted felon, is a pretty powerful argument. It pains me, but it's a powerful argument. What should, and Judge Merchant, when he heard arguments from both sides, says, I want to think about this. He might dismiss all the cases. He might sentence him. What's the right thing for Merchant to do?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think it's a very hard judge. You know, I was married to a journalist who was so critical.
A journalist.
No, come on, Jim. I was married to a journalist who was so critical of Gerald Ford when he pardoned President Nixon. I mean, he wrote a scathing series of columns in the New York Times. And 5 or 10 years later, he publicly apologized to President Gerald Ford.
Why?
Because he felt that President Ford had made the correct decision to pardon President Nixon, keeping in mind our country. We are a very divided country in some ways at the moment. And I think while it may not be at the forefront of a judge's mind, certainly we have overwhelmingly elected, a man to be the next president of the United States. It's not like Boston and Mayor Curley, who was in prison, and people in Boston re-elected him the mayor of Boston. This is our nation. We are the most powerful nation in the world. And I think it is entirely... What I would do is whatever Judge Marchand's decision is, I would support that decision and let the system play out. That's what I would do.
Can we say the name of your wonderful husband for young people to know? Anthony
Lewis.
Lewis, one of the great journalists of our time. Justice Marshall, it is a thrill not only to see you, to anticipate seeing you, I should say. We're thrilled to have you. Please join us in thanking former Chief Justice Marshall.
And thank you for lifting the mood around here. It's been very
glum. Won't last. It's okay. It won't last.
It will.
Okay.
Take care.
You
Thank
have to make it last.
We'll do our
Thank you
best.
very
Thank
much.
you so much.